shocking twist in a murder that stunned a neighborhood in the Bronx.
A man found dismembered inside an apartment. Now today, police arrested a man named Sheldon Johnson. He is a criminal justice activist, and he boasted about turning his life around after getting out of prison as recently as going on shows like the Joe Rogan Podcast. Now tonight, he is back in handcuffs and he's facing murder charges. News 4's Ida Siegel is in Highbridge, where the crime scene investigators are still looking for evidence.
That's 48-year-old Sheldon Johnson being walked off in handcuffs, yelling to reporters that he didn't do what cops say he did. Murder, manslaughter, and criminal possession of a weapon. It's a shocking set of charges for a man most recently known for this.
I had a wife, I had family still, my son was growing up. He was hearing stories about my so-called notoriety.
That's Johnson appearing on the popular Joe Rogan podcast, talking about his efforts to reform himself and help other kids detach themselves from gang life, a job he's uniquely qualified for after spending 25 years in prison for attempted murder as a high-ranking member of the Bloods.
Prison does two things to you. It brings out the best or it brings out the worst.
But police say this is also him, here on Summit Avenue Tuesday night, carrying cleaning supplies and a full black garbage bag in and out of this building. Police were called to apartment 6G after a neighbor heard gunshots and saw Johnson in and out of the apartment. She told the building super. When police entered the apartment, they found a man's torso and a foot inside a bin. Law enforcement sources say after seeing Johnson on surveillance footage, they searched his apartment and found the victim's legs, arms, and head in the freezer.
That's very disturbing.
Yeah.
It makes you want to move real quick.
Police say the victim is 44-year-old Colin Small. Sources say it's possible their dispute stemmed from time they spent together in prison. But folks in this neighborhood shocked to hear that a man who had worked so hard to turn his life around, even working with the Queen's Defender's Office, might have fallen back to his old ways in a very violent fashion.
Yes, he was turning himself around and stuff like that, but remember, we're creatures of habit. So whatever happened in his violent past probably crept back up, and there you go.
We reached out to the Queen's Defender's Office. No comment at this point. Again, Johnson says that he's innocent. Reporting from Highbridge, Ida Siegel, News 4, New York.
Making arrests after a human torso and foot were found inside a building in the Bronx.
The suspect has been identified as Sheldon Johnson, a criminal justice activist who previously served time in prison.
All right, Fox 5's Linda Schmidt live in the Highbridge section of the Bronx tonight with more on this surprising turn of events. Linda.
Yeah, certainly surprising. Well, first of all, this guy said he had turned his life around after spending most of his adult life in prison. In fact, just last year, he started working with the Queen's Public Defender's Office. Well, now he is accused of shooting a man in the head in the apartment building right here behind me and then dismembering his body. 48-year-old Sheldon Johnson of Harlem is charged with murder and concealment of a human corpse. This is Johnson recently on Joe Rogan's podcast, talking about how he had turned his life around after a life of crime. He was working with troubled youth with the Queen's Public Defender's Office. The shirt he is wearing says Queen's Defenders.
I got into school, I got my GED. From there, I got involved in correspondence courses. I started interacting with guys who were teaching ART, aggression replacement training, and I started to begin to understand how these concepts work, what positive visualization is, deep breathing, how to remove yourself, conflict resolution.
Well, police say Johnson's life of crime apparently was not over. He is accused of shooting 44-year-old Colin Small in the head in Small's 6th-floor apartment on Summit Avenue and then dismembering his body. Detectives combing over potential evidence again today. Inside the apartment in the Highbridge section of the Bronx, a law enforcement source telling me they found a man's torso and foot in a plastic storage bin. Investigators also found the victim's head, legs, and arms in Johnson's freezer in his apartment building in Harlem. The superintendent of the victim's apartment building saying a neighbor heard gunshots, and surveillance video tells the story.
The tenant of the apartment, he came in, he never came out. So I called police because it's suspicious.
The super providing me with these surveillance pictures inside the building that allegedly show Johnson carrying bags in and out of the apartment building the day of the murder and changing his clothes several times, as well as wearing disguises. Now, today, I also reached out to the Queens Public Defender's Office where Sheldon Johnson had been working, but they had no comment. Back inside to you.
Tonight, a man charged with murder and moments ago facing a judge accused of dismembering a body and then carrying some of the body parts back to his home.
Eyewitness News reporter Stefan Kim live at Bronx Criminal Court with what just went down. Stefan?
Well, Sandra and Bill, Tuesday, cops found a torso and arms in a Bronx apartment. Yesterday, they found the victim's head and legs inside a freezer in an apartment in Harlem. Today, police arrested the man who lives there. He is the man alleged of committing a particularly heinous and evil crime, 48-year-old Sheldon Johnson, accused of killing a man and dismembering his body. But Johnson says they have the wrong man.
I'm innocent.
The victim, 44-year-old Colin Small. Tuesday night, police found his torso and arms inside his apartment in the High Bridge section of the Bronx after the super called cops. Orlando Medina says a tenant called him around 1 a.m.
Someone was pleading for their life. She said she heard 2 gunshots. Someone saying, please don't kill me, I got family, something like that. And then 2 more gunshots pretty quickly. Coming in, coming out of the apartment with different articles of clothes, different wigs, you know. So it's weird. Everything was observed by the surveillance cameras. Right. All those things are those things I saw.
Prosecutors allege at one point he was seen on video leaving the victim's apartment wearing the victim's clothing. Then last night, investigators say they found the victim's head and legs in Johnson's freezer at his Harlem apartment on 5th Avenue. The medical examiner says the victim was shot once in the head. The allegations sending shivers through the victim's Bronx building.
It feels like the devil just crawled through here.
Johnson is an ex-con who today works as a criminal justice reform advocate, seen here in a Facebook picture he posted with Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. He served about 25 years behind bars for attempted murder and has a long rap sheet filled with other violent crimes. This is Johnson on Joe Rogan's podcast last month.
I had a wife, I had family still, my son was growing up. He was hearing stories about my so-called notoriety, and I just didn't want to be that dad.
Johnson went on to talk about turning his life around.
Got my GED. I left the gangs alone, which was a benefit for them because, you know, I was what you call an authoritarian. I was a rule guy. I'm still a rule guy. I like rules. You know, I like rules, I like structure.
The courtroom was filled with his supporters at his arraignment tonight, with one wearing a jacket reading, specializing in wrongful conviction cases. The executive director of his employer, the Queens Defenders, also at court. They all declined comment. Now, Johnson nodded confidently at his supporters as he entered the courtroom. He's been charged with murder, manslaughter, and criminal possession of a weapon. The judge remanded him. He's due back in court on Monday.
So, we're not making light of this crazy story, but you probably have something in your freezer at home that you would say shouldn't be there. But usually it's like a TV dinner, or brown bananas, some kind of an ancient frozen vegetable. Or in the case of this guy in the Bronx, this is not a joke, there was a severed head in the guy's freezer. So police have now arrested this 48-year-old, Sheldon Johnson, after doing a routine wellness check and the discovery of dismembered body parts in his apartment. This is in the Bronx in New York. He's an ex-con to begin with, but the thing about him is he turned into this criminal justice advocate, recently rubbing shoulders with the likes of the Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, and even sat down with Joe Rogan to discuss his advocacy work.
And I said to myself, I've been doing bad for so long, I'm going to try to do something good. If all else fails, I could always go back to doing bad. But let me try.
Not hard enough, I guess, in terms of trying. Let's bring Laura Ingle in on this. News Nation's Laura Ingle. beyond gruesome, really, the details of this. But tell us more about it.
It is, and we're still trying to figure out exactly what happened here, because you saw that interview and it looked like he really had his life together. And again, this is just if true. And there have been a lot of people rooting for Sheldon Johnson after his release from prison. He's had this underdog story of rehabilitation, which turned him into that criminal justice advocate you said about. He's made the rounds doing public appearances, including the popular Joe Rogan podcast, talking about doing time and turning his life around to help others. And this storyline took this alleged dark turn this week when Johnson was arrested and arraigned on murder and manslaughter charges for the brutal killing of a Bronx man this week. Now, Johnson is also accused of dismembering his alleged victim and putting body parts in bags, bins, and a freezer. Neighbors of the victim, who has been identified as 44-year-old Colin Small, say they heard these two guys arguing Tuesday, and then they heard a man pleading for his life saying, "Please don't, I have a family." Then they say they heard gunshots being fired from inside Small's apartment. Police allege Johnson dismembered Small and stuffed his body parts into plastic bags and putting even his head in the freezer. Now, just last month on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, Johnson said he used to be a member of the Bloods gang and that he decided to turn his life around out of getting out of solitary confinement while in prison. Listen.
I got into school. I got my GED. From there, I got involved in correspondence courses. I started interacting with guys who were teaching ART, aggression replacement training, and I started to begin to understand how these concepts work, what positive visualization is, deep breathing, how to remove yourself, conflict resolution. All of these ideas of change began to take place with me.
And Johnson became a client advocate for the nonprofit law group Queens Defenders sometime after being released from prison. He served 2 decades for a series of armed robberies in 1999, and that's what we know about him.
Okay, that's what we know about him now. And then where does this go from here? What's next in this case?
He's expected to be in court on Monday. He has pled not guilty. We've also reached out to the Queens Defenders where Johnson worked. They declined to comment, so we're going to wait till Monday and see what he has to say. When he was brought out, he yelled to reporters, "I'm innocent." So we'll see.
You cover stuff like this all the time, and this would be a terrible story no matter what, but just the idea, you listen to him on the Joe Rogan podcast, the guy looked like he had his whole life together. That's right. And he was like an example for other people. And
that's right.
I guess it just shows you never know, but.
You just never know. And there are surveillance photos that we haven't been able to obtain yet, and hopefully we'll have those for you next week, showing what appears to be Johnson coming out of this apartment complex with a blonde wig on. Other people in the apartment complex said there's something weird going on. Somebody's removing bins at 2 o'clock in the morning. This doesn't look right. They called police for a wellness check because they heard the shots, and then they heard somebody say, "Please, please, no." And so, this is just a wild story that continues to turn.
We know you'll stay on top of that. We know you'll have some reporting next week on the Scott Peterson case. So a lot going on with Laura Ingle, is always on that true crime beat. But this one is crazy. Thank you.
Hey, what's going on, you guys? Welcome back to another episode of Greenlit Gang TV. I tried to bring you guys as many videos as I can. I'm trying to go back to back the last couple of days, bringing you guys these videos, bringing you guys a wide variety of topics. Today we're going to be talking about a gentleman who was in the news last month for all the wrong reasons. A gentleman by the name of Sheldon Johnson. A lot of you, me included, I first heard about this guy. He was on Joe Rogan, telling his story, talking about being incarcerated for so long. Kind of not a victim story, but in a way, that he was over-sentenced for the crimes he committed. He admitted to the crimes he committed, but basically said that they gave me way too much time. I had to fight to get out. And once he got out, he joined the Queens, New York Public Defender's Office, was fighting for victims' rights and fighting for people that were wrongfully sentenced or over-sentenced. So, it looked like he was out doing good. Well, come to find out, he's rearrested for murder and some very heinous, serious charges. So we're going to kind of jump right into it here. Sheldon Johnson, born May 6, 1975 at Mount Sinai Hospital. Really blended family. Italian mother, African-American, Native American father, who were both, this is crazy, both were deaf and mute. I double-triple checked that. That was very true. Grew up on 112th Street and 5th Avenue in Harlem. Talked about growing up with a lot of anger, a lot of confusion. Right? Parents are both handicaps. They were a mixed race couple, dealt with a lot of bullying because of both issues, right? Not just handicaps, not just because deaf, because of being a mixed race. people looked down on him in a way. They were less than, okay? And that's really something to remember when you're dealing with people in poverty, when you're dealing with people from these situations. It kind of explains why they chose the life they chose. They wanted a sense of belonging. Sheldon Johnson talks about joining the Bloods, becoming a gang leader, being a drug dealer. There's reasoning behind that. Okay, so it's really important. It's why I give backgrounds on a lot of these people's childhoods, to kind of try to give you a better understanding of why they did what they did. So, anyway, mixed race family, born on 112th Street and 5th Ave in Harlem. Parents are both deaf and mute. Talks about how his father had been incarcerated, grandfather had been incarcerated, and his great-grandpa had actually been a slave, right? He actually, though, for a while grew up thinking he was adopted because of the way his parents looked and the handicaps they had. Because when you see Sheldon Johnson, when you see the pictures that I put up in the video, he's African-American, right? It's clear what he is. So talking about having an Italian mother, part Native American, part African-American father, you could see as a kid the confusion that would arise from this. And I do have sympathy for that. I do have sympathy for having a hard time being able to communicate your thoughts, your feelings to your parents. If there was a time where he really thought he was adopted, man, the emotions that just must have been running through him was crazy. He also talked about, and these are his own writings. I read a lot of his own writings that he wrote while he was in prison. He talks about how badly he wanted to be accepted by his peers. He wanted to be accepted by the same people that were picking on him, right? He just wanted to be normal. He just wanted to be treated like everyone else. And unfortunately, where he grew up, the abject poverty, the crime rate, he jumped right in full go. Began committing crimes at a young age. He was arrested at the age of 11 for stabbing his math teacher, whom he said was a strong believer in corporal punishment, which corporal punishment basically means, some physical, nowadays would be considered, physical abuse. And basically says that stabbed him with, it was like a little knife that he had, that he attacked his teacher, and in the writings where he talks about it, he justifies it for this reason or that. But regardless, he gets arrested for it. Also was arrested in 1989 for selling crack cocaine and was sent to DFY, or Division for Youth. And this is where he talks about these institutions do the opposite of reform. And in fact, they help these juveniles become better career criminals in the long run because you're housing them with like-minded people. They're not trying to get better. Understaffed, underfunded, right? They're just trying to get through the day. If anything, it causes people more violence, more mental illness, more stress, more anxiety, which has been proven with science now. Literally studies have shown that all these factors contribute to criminal activity. They did not help. So Sheldon's going down this path, and he admits it. He says in his writings, you can see that he's going down this path. He chose this path, and that's what he's going down. He said on Joe Rogan that he was a major gang leader for the Bloods, was buying and selling large amounts of drugs, even doing so at the beginning of his large prison sentence. So we'll talk about the crimes he ends up doing his large prison sentence for, but even when he went in for that, he still hadn't changed his life at that point, all right? So gang banging, drug dealing, it's all leading to the, what's about to culminate, all right? And what culminates is multiple robberies, a murder. And it talks about this in Joe Rogan. It talks about, what he did, had his guys, beat this guy up, take money, rob the house, yada, yada. It was like a home invasion, okay? And this is where some people kind of differ and opinions are split because they try to make it sound like he gave the guy only a few stitches. But to me, in reality, it sounds like he got lucky. Sheldon was very lucky that the guy only needed a few stitches, and the situation could have gone much, much worse, all right? So, gets convicted, all these charges, okay? In June of 99. He receives a 50-year sentence, all right, for those crimes. Now, I don't want to say the wrong thing on this, okay? What I read was robbery charges, okay? The homicide, I do believe that was inaccurate on one thing I read, so it sounds like from what I read, mainly robbery and assault, because he talks about that in this case, that it was robbery and assault, but he downplays it. He downplays the effect of what he had. He says, yep, I admit it, but he says I was way over sentenced, and that he received a 50-year sentence for those crimes, which they called like a civil death sentence, because 50 years, he's going to be 70-something years old by the time he gets out. He says in part he got that sentence because he rejected his initial plea deal and took it to trial, which he ended up losing. So, goes into prison, does not change right away. Still drug dealing, still gangbanging, one of the leaders of the Bloods in New York, which, if you know anything about New York and the Blood set, heavily involved in the prisons in the New York system, the Bloods are. Involved in a prison riot in 2001 and ended up getting 36 months in the SHU, or segregated housing unit. No outside contact, shower 3 times a week if you're lucky, small amount of rec time with a waist chain on. Things are very limited. You lose the small amount of privileges that you have. You already have a small amount of privileges in prison. You lose a lot of those, or they're very, very restricted. All movements are watched. All movements are monitored. And it said he stated that if it wasn't for him beginning to write and really getting into, in his own words, basically put pen to paper. He said that I'd been doing bad for so long, I'm going to try and do something good, all right? He talked about not wanting to live anymore, and if it wasn't for this stuff, he would have gone down that path. So, which, could have resulted in him not being around much longer. He had to have a purpose to live. And then that kind of goes into another discussion about solitary confinement and segregating housing. What it does to a person's psyche, a person's mental health. It just breaks you down from the inside out. You're in a prison in your mind. You're in a prison physically, but even worse, you're in a prison in your mind. So writing saved him. I read a lot of his writings. He was talented. He was good. And you can kind of see how he eventually, changes. He gets his education, began writing and never stopped, gets his GED, gets all these other degrees, gets all these other certifications, reached out, talked to, made relationships with the right kind of people, and over time fights for his release, gets people in his corner, gets the right people, the right lawyers, the right, attention on him. And that's really what it takes, to get out of these really long sentences. They don't just let you out for no reason. So finally, in May of 2023, he secures his release, all right? Or I'm sorry, May of 2022 secures his release, all right? Or of 23. Gosh, I got to double check that. 22 or 23, he gets out. He begins working with the Queen's Public Defender's Office, all right? Turned his life around and basically talks about all the good he was doing. You see him in some of the pictures with with like the state's attorney, who are prosecutors. Okay, these guys are the ones that are going after the people that convicted him, are the same people now he's working with. All right, wants to tell his story, share his story, and this brought him a lot of notoriety. All right, you see him; he makes it to Joe Rogan, where he talks about his life and his crimes. And again, and I do agree with this. I do believe he kind of downplayed his initial crimes that got him sent to prison. But that's a lot of attention. If you make it to the JRE, the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, man, you've got a story to tell, and you are an important person in today's society. And he was. But unfortunately, it really wasn't meant to be. March of 2024, the NYPD responds to a call of a body that was in different parts inside the victim's apartment in Harlem. Found this person in the freezer, found him in a storage container, storage bins. The victim was by the name of Colin Small. He was 44 years old. Interestingly enough, him and Sheldon had gone back a ways. They had done time together at Sing Sing prison. And what was really interesting is that they used the same alias, Timothy Gibbs, which was just something I read and picked up on. So, and Colin Small was a drug dealer, somebody that committed many crimes. Both of these guys had long rap sheets, but nobody deserves to pass away the way Colin Small did. And pretty much right away, you see the security footage. Sheldon Johnson is the prime suspect, and I really don't know how he thought he was going to get away with this, because you see him, he's going in and out of the apartment. He's wearing different disguises. Once Colin Small goes in on the final security video, he never comes back out, okay? You see Sheldon Johnson with storage bins and all these things, wearing wigs, wearing glasses, mustache, just a really weird scene. And again, they had a history together. Supposedly they had beef, all right? But still, nobody deserves to pass away the way Colin Small did. The superintendent of the building said the tenant went in and never came out. You see him Sheldon Johnson carrying bags in and out of the apartment, changing his clothes several times. Just a very, very weird thing. So this was very recent. This is why I wanted to do this story. It's still developing. He's currently being held without bail. And of course, they're making a lot of content about this because he made it on Joe Rogan. He told his story. He had a huge backing. He had a lot of people in his corner that believed he should have never got the time he got. He should have never spent the amount of time that he spent. And in a way, he was treated as innocent, even though technically he never said he was innocent. He just had told the story so many times and gotten so good at telling the story that he kind of had people convinced that, you know what, he was young, didn't really do anything that wrong anyways. Oh my God, poor guy. And he turned it into something that was profitable. He was making money from this. And then come to find out, he commits these horrible crimes, which he's currently locked up for. So anyway, this is one of those I'd really like to hear your guys' thoughts, your guys' comments. I wanted to get this video up today. I love making these for you guys. I'm still working on figuring out YouTube's guidelines and policies, to be honest with you. Half my videos are monetized, half of them aren't, and I still don't know why the ones that don't get monetized, why they're not. So bear with me. But for you guys, all I care about is making good content. All I care about is making stuff that you guys enjoy, that you guys like. It takes me a lot of time to put these videos together, and it takes me a lot of time in my head, my thought process, trying to figure out which stories I think you guys are going to like. So anyways, just appreciate each and every one of you. Hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you.